Hi, my name is Felicity Bokingo. For this video, I will tackle about Ireland in the Second World War. When the United Kingdom declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939, Ireland is part of the island existing the six countries of Northern Ireland. Despite being technically a British dominion at the time elected to maintain a policy on neutrality, they were the only member of the British Commonwealth to do so. Amon de Valera, the Tisak, meaning Prime Minister, said in 1941 from the moment the war began, there were for the state only one policy possible, neutrality, and unlike many other small states, Ireland managed to maintain that neutrality throughout the course of the war. But it didn't come without or consequences. The unique positions come without that Ireland had during the World War is history that deserved to be remembered. There are many reasons that Southern Ireland decided to remain neutral during the Second World War. The nation felt it had little to contribute militarily and little to gain from entering the war. Moreover, the still new nation saw a need to use its military capability to defend itself, in case any major power decided to invade the US islands for its own end. Drew Walsh, the Secretary of the Department of External Affairs, said in 1941 that small cannot assume except their own existence of our own people comes before all other considerations. Walsh publicly argued that Britain was likely to lose against the Germans and Ireland should not be allied to the losing side. But perhaps the most significant reason that Ireland chose to remain neutral had to do with the recent event for the still new independent nation. During the Great War, Ireland had been a part of the United Kingdom and sent more than 2,000 troops to war, but the Great War had also inspired the growing movement for Irish Home Rule. The 1916 insurrection called the Easter Rising War, an attempt to leverage the destruction of the Great War. To overthrow British rule and create an independent republic, the rising had failed, but draconian British response had caused a backlash and grew support for the cause of independence. Frictions increased when the British government attempted to implement conscriptions highly unpopular in Ireland, leading up to a political crisis called the Conscription Crisis of 1918 for the galvanizing Irish support for Home Rule. The growing sentiment has resulted in Irish War for Independence between January 1919 and July 1921, which resulted in de facto Irish independence as a self-government dominion under the 1921 Anglo-Irish Treaty that had been followed the Irish Civil War, fought with June 1922 to May 1923. Between the Fruit Treaty government and the Irish Republican Army, a guerrilla faction that had fought in the War for Independence who opposed the treaty since it did not create a fully autonomous Irish Republic. While pro-treaty forces had ostensibly won the war, the conflict resulted in only a ceasefire and had left a better legacy. Then, conflict over provisions of the Anglo-Irish Treaty had resulted in a retaliatory trade war between Ireland or the United Kingdom between 1932 to 1938. There was still strong and anti-British sentiment in Ireland in 1939. An effigy of British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was born in Dublin that year. Ireland contained both anti- and pro-fascist sentiment. Brigades of Irish volunteers had, for example, fought on both the nationalist and Republican sides during the Spanish Civil War. But between 1939 and 1940, the era had been engaging in a bombing campaign called the Plan or Sabotage Campaign in the United Kingdom, with a goal of ending the partition of Northern and Southern Ireland. Simply, Irish entry into the war would have reopened the conflict of the Irish Civil War. De Valera said, "At the time, any policy other than neutrality will divide our people and for a divided nation." fling itself into this war would be to commit suicide. De Valero maintained that position even in the face of the British offer to end partition and create a united Ireland in exchange for Ireland declaring war on Germany. Neutrality was popular in Ireland, but it was largely seen as betrayal in both the United Kingdom and the United States.
And neutrality offered its own challenges for De Valera and the Irish government in 1939. The Irish Parliament enacted the Emergency Powers Act, which gave the government nearly dictatorial powers to enforce Irish neutrality, including censorship of the press and the mail and government control over swaths of the economy. The war years in Ireland are colloquially referred to as the emergency in reference to the act. Ireland's locations made invasion a threat, as De Valera said. We are fully aware that in a world of war, each set of belligerents is ever ready to regard those who are not with them as against them. The threat was from both the Allies as well as the Axis. The fear that Ireland could not withstand a German invasion, which would then give Germany a base to attack Britain, led to consideration of a peremptory invasion as the UK had done in Iceland in 1940. The Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, James Craig, argued that De Valera had fallen under the spell of Nazis and Highland. Regiments of the British Army should be used to overthrow the Irish government and establish a military protection. While Churchill rejected Craig's plan, he asked Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery to develop a plan to invade the captured Irish port that might be needed for the war effort. The plan was never enacted, partly because of the concern that it would have involved pro-fascist elements in Ireland.
But Ireland was an obvious target for German invasion, where it would serve as a base for attacking Great Britain connection between the German adver or military intelligence and the ARA started as early as 1939, and in 1940 a police raid by Ireland on an ERA members' home found the plans for something called Plan Kathleen, which was a planned German invasions and combined German-era offensive to take Northern Ireland, although the plan was incomplete and seems never to have seriously been considered by the Germans.
The Germans, however, created an invasion plan for Ireland called Operation Green, which was uncovered by British intelligence and passed to the Irish. This was to have occurred alongside Operation Sea Lion, the planned German invasion of Britain. It's unclear whether the plan was actually intended or postponed as a ruse to Great British concern for its flag. The plan was sidelined when Operation Sea Lions was indefinitely postponed in September 1940, but briefly revisited in December 1940, when Hitler heard news reports that Britain may plan an invasion of Ireland. Hitler invasions and invasion in case Ireland requested help, offering to supply Ireland with captured British equipment. The German Navy, however, was not enthusiastic, feeling that an invasion force in Ireland could not be reliably supported by sea. The rest of German invasion did compel Ireland cooperate with Britain on Plan W, the joint defense of Ireland in case of German invasion, which included a British invasion of Ireland that would occur at the request of the Irish government. When U.S. forces sent to bases in Northern Ireland in 1942, Germany became concerned that America might conduct a primitive invasion of Irish territory. And in response, Germany Operation Osprey, which would have inserted German SS troops into the Ireland to train Irish partitions to conduct the American invasion. The plan was abandoned when the American invasions of Ireland failed to materialize And despite all of these plans, islands managed to avoid invasion throughout. While Ireland remained neutral as part of the Commonwealth, Irishmen called English in the armed services of the United Kingdom. Although numbers are unclear, more than 50,000 men from Southern Ireland volunteered for services in the British Army. And more volunteered for the Royal Navy and Royal Air Force. In addition, thousands relocated to the United Kingdom to engage in labor supporting the war, work in allied merchant fleets. The motivation for Irish enlistment and the British Armed Forces varied but did represent a contradiction. Majority seemed to have supported Irish neutrality, and yet they chose to go to war for their own reasons. Some were following a family tradition, others were motivated by anti-fascist sentiment, while others were seeking adventure or avoiding trouble with police. Irish service represented difficulties for both the government of the United Kingdom and Ireland. Ireland feared the participation of these Irish troops, could threaten their neutrality, and so sought to keep the participation quiet. Churchill wanted to recognize the Irish contribution and create Irish regiments, but Secretary of State for War David Marguerson argued that recognizing Irish volunteers might compel the government of Ireland to restrict volunteers from leaving their country. In the end, British chose a halfway proposal that brigaded together several existing British Army Irish battalions. The 30th Irish Brigade served with distinctions in the Tunisian and Italian campaigns.
Irishmen fought in British service with distinguished themselves.
Dr. Cathy Hamilton was an Irish citizen whose family had relocated to England in 1936. Spanish enlisted in the Royal Air Force in 1936, and despite low marks in private school, was eventually posted to Antietam during the Battle of Britain. Over his career, Thomas scored an outstanding 28 and by some sources 33 aerial victories, becoming the Christian. But perhaps the oldest story of Irish service in the British military in the Second World War was that of Irishmen James Brady and Frank Stringer. Brady and Stringer enlisted with the Royal Irish Fusiliers in 1938 and 1940, were started at the Channel Islands of Guernsey. At some point, they got into a drunken brawl in a pub, and were jailed for insulting a policeman in 1940. Britain concluded that the Channel Islands were not descendable when British military evacuated the islands.
Bradley and Stringer, however, were apparently left behind in jail. And when the Germans took the islands without fearing a shot, in June, the two became prisoners of war.
While Ireland remained neutral throughout the war, that did not free them completely. Several German bombs fell in Ireland over the course of the war, most presumably due to navigational error, however particularly deadly with North Tab. In 1941, killed 28 people. Documents after the war suggested the raid may have been deliberate rather than accidental, as Hitler was angry over what he saw as Irish violation of neutrality. Notably, the Valeras allowing fire brigades from the south to cross the border and helped extinguish fires from a German air raid on Northern Ireland in April that have been called the Belfast Blitz. Initially guests of state, initially British service members quietly allowed to make their way back to Britain. But as Germans were captured from crashed aircraft or sunken submarines, the Irish were forced to enforce the policy. Despite the challenges faced, including significant shortages, damage to its merchant fleet despite its neutral status, and the constant threat of invasion, Ireland managed to maintain its policy of neutrality throughout the war. A symbol of that was the choice by De Valera to allow both German and Japanese embassies to remain open in Ireland throughout the war, and in 1945, he extended officially condolences to the German people over the death of the Adolf Hitler. While he received condemnations from many quarters, he maintained the actions was a diplomatic protocol and symbol of Ireland's neutrality in the war.
In the end, Irish neutrality had a definite pro-ally undercurrent and a report in 1945 noted many ways the Irish government cooperated with and needed the Allies from quietly allowing British planners to fly through southern Irish water on their Atlantic patrols, to share intelligence and sharing weather reports, one of which was critical to determine the timing of the Allied invasion of Normandy. On June 6, 1944, the position of Ireland maintaining neutrality is still controversial. Some see it's a practical position that maintained Irish independence, but others question whether it was correct for Ireland to ignore the moral atrocity committed by the Nazis and question policies such as, for example, from the news, the discovery of Nazi extermination comes because it will threaten the Irish idea of neutrality, that maintained the Allies in the Axis were moral equivalent, but despite those questions, Ireland managing to maintain its neutrality among the conflicting politics and needs of the war is history that deserves to be remembered. That's all, ma'am. Thank you.